Hello, Tom Maguire. So just time for a quick review of the book Wake Up by Piers Morgan. So I finished this about a week ago. I've been meaning to review it for a little while. I just haven't had a chance. I've had very little time just recently, so sorry about that. There's been a bit of a gap since the last review. I've just been watching the Casualty episode. They've just done it. First time I've seen Casualty in absolutely years on coronavirus. Pretty sobering, pretty horrible. So if I've got a bit of a sparkle in my eye, it's probably from that. It's pretty emotional, to be honest, and that kind of brings me to this book. Really, so much of what Piers talks about in this book, if you see him on Good Morning Britain, I think he's fantastic on there. So much of what he talks about in this book, I think, comes back to the amount of self-entitlement there is in this country, in our culture, in the West in general, I suppose. We seem to think that we deserve certain things without really putting much effort in. We seem to think that we deserve a certain standard of living, etc, etc. And yes, I know that's easy for certain people to say. It's probably easy for me to say as well, or just as easy for me to say as it is for anyone else. I'm aware of all that, but I don't think it's healthy to go around thinking that stuff should just be given to you. So one of the messages I took away from this book, and I hope other people take away from this book, is that we should all aspire to be like Captain Tom Moore, or Colonel Tom Moore as he now is, and we should really do absolutely everything we possibly can to not turn out like Dominic Cummings or Kim Kardashian, for that matter. There's a few others in this book as well that he talks about, but there really are some fantastic examples of human beings around. We don't always see them or hear about them very often, but there are plenty of examples and some really horrible ones as well. The sort of people that we really shouldn't want to be like. And it's very easy to say it. We're all human. We all do need to be more kind to each other and more understanding and empathetic. But with that, I think we also need to take more responsibility for ourselves and to try and help each other as well. I think, and the stuff that Piers Morgan talks about, he's one of those people who's hated by quite a lot of people, but I think he's a lot more popular nowadays. I think those people who watch Good Morning Britain will realise that if you listen to him, actually, whether you like him or not, I think he's very difficult to argue with a lot of the time. As far as I'm concerned, he gives a very balanced argument most of the time. And his strength, I think, is that he seems to actually be quite self-reflective and actually is prepared to say when he's wrong and actually when he needs to change and move on. And he says certain things like that in the book as well, which I quite like to hear. So for me, this isn't really much of a mind-expanding book because, to be fair, I agree with quite a lot of the stuff he says anyway. I'm not a right-wing fascist just because I may have some conservative views here and there necessarily, and I consider myself to be a liberal. I've always been a liberal. He's basically making the point that there is no middle ground. You're not allowed to be anywhere in the middle, and that's difficult for someone like me because I'm the sort of person who tends to see the argument from both sides. Very often I will, I wouldn't necessarily say I sit on the fence. I'm quite an opinionated person, but I do, when I go into an argument or a conversation, I want to learn. I want to take something away. I don't necessarily have to be right. In fact, I don't always want to be right. I quite like being proven wrong some of the time. It's actually quite nice to realise I didn't know something and then to learn. So many people get up in arms about Piers and they think he's terrible and he's a fascist and he's got no sensitivity. And some of the stories he tells in here, some of the vitriol and horrible stuff he's had said, written about him on Twitter and what have you in different replies, stuff as gross as kind of like, I hoped you'd die. And when Caroline Flack died, who he actually knew quite well, saying that it was his fault and stuff, and just some really vicious, nasty stuff, basically. And these are the sort of people who harp on about being kind and being better people and these woke types, and he talks about being woke a lot in this book, and that's really what it's about. It's a bit of a kind of he's basically going on against the kind of the woke culture, I suppose, which I agree with. I think we do need to be, of course we should be liberal and forward thinking and open minded, and we should be accepting of people, of course, and he says that in there, but we shouldn't be doing it with double standards, and we shouldn't be getting ourselves to this stage in society where we can't have a conversation without fear of offending someone. It's just like Jordan Peterson says, isn't it? It's like, we have to risk offending someone if we're going to have a conversation and if we're going to try to get to the bottom of something. You will solve nothing if every single conversation you go into, you're treading on eggshells and being careful about what you're saying the whole time. He talks about people doing this virtue signalling as well all the time. The Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, what a prat he is. It's humankind, we say now, not mankind. Oh, what a legend, he said humankind, he sticks up for us. Absolutely ridiculous. And then how many weeks later he's shown blacking his face up and just being completely inappropriate. He says that was kind of a different time. I think he was nearly 30 when he did that, apparently. So just complete hypocrites. He talks about John Legend and how he took that Christmas song and, you know, Baby It's Cold Outside, that lovely old Christmas song, he changed it. And then Piers makes the point that, you know, John Legend wouldn't say anything against any of his peers, any other rappers or anyone who, these guys and girls who use absolutely, you know, really offensive lyrics. It's okay for them. He's not going to change their songs, but he's going to change someone's song from however many years ago because they can't do anything about it. So yeah, so he's talking about virtue signalling, wokery, and, you know, he admits right from the off. He says right from the beginning, okay, I've got a bit of a problem with veganism and I take the piss out of vegans and stuff. And it's like, you know, I don't have anything against vegans. I'm not trying to stop them or cancel them. I just don't particularly like it very much. It just irritates me a little bit. And he says, I hold on to my right to voice my opinion on that. Why shouldn't I? And I'm sorry, and I'd be happy for anyone to challenge me on this. I completely agree with that. Their freedom of speech is freedom of speech, isn't it? He talks a lot about Harry and Meghan, and it's quite enjoyable listening to him slag them off as well, calling them self-entitled twerps or whatever it is he says about them. And it's right, isn't it? You just think taxpayers paying millions of pounds for you to go and do whatever the hell you want just because you don't agree with this, you don't agree with that. He is right, and he holds these politicians on Good Morning Britain to account, and because someone needs to. I can remember back in the day my dad talking about Jeremy Paxman and saying how good he was and stuff, and I always felt really disappointed whenever I watched him. And I think I remember my dad being disappointed as well, because we always expected him to really tear into people, and he'd give it a little bit, but there was always that bit of holding back, whereas Piers just absolutely... He tells them absolutely straight. And I was talking to my dad about this the other day, and he was saying, oh, I think Piers is fantastic. And it was quite weird for my dad to say that in some ways. But I completely agree. If you put yourself up for that position, you're a politician, you're running the country, you have to be held to account. You have to, you know, if you don't know something, put your hands up and be honest about it and just say, okay, no, I haven't come with that information. Don't lie and don't try and bullshit people, because it's so insulting when these politicians or anyone on TV, they blatantly lie and they think that we're stupid enough just to sort of go, oh, they must be telling the truth. Prince Andrew, he was lying like a little school child in that interview, and it was so irritating watching it, wasn't it? Because he was such a pompous arse, just pretending, oh really, I don't know, no, was she upstairs, wasn't she? Oh no, I went to get a pizza, did I don't know, did I? Oh really? Oh really? It's literally like watching a 14-year-old in school trying to sort of lie his way to out of an off-school detention with his teacher. It's just so insulting. And Piers holds the people he interviews to account, and absolutely right. And some people don't like that, and they think that he's a bully and stuff. And it's like, no. If you get your argument straight and you're honest and you're not trying to bullshit, then you'll be fine, you know. So I think he does a fantastic job, I have to say. And I didn't used to like him years ago. When he was with the Mirror and things, I didn't know so much about him particularly. I probably had preconceptions about him and things that I'd heard snippets here and there when he wasn't quite so famous. But when you actually watch him on Good Morning Britain, I think he's great. I think he's really good, and his book Wake Up is really good. It's like I say, it's nothing particularly new. You know roughly how he thinks, what his opinions are if you've seen him on GMB and you followed him for a little while or what have you. But it is interesting, and he does give some really good arguments and some good examples and some good stories from over time. And yeah, some of it just makes you kind of think, wow, that's crazy, I can't believe that, and oh, that's irritating. And it is a bit of a, you know, he is a journalist, and papers and the media are there to evoke emotion from us and things, and so whenever I watch Piers and people like him, I try not to allow emotion to come into it really. I just listen to them and just take a breath and just think about what it is they're saying. And yeah, but he talks about the Gillette ad, how Gillette did that for years. They were about sort of traditional masculinity, and then all of a sudden they turn around and did that advert about toxic masculinity, and it's like, come on, really? All us men, we're just terrible. We're terrible people, are we? Because, oh, geez, it doesn't even. Oh, just listen to the book or read the book. I don't want to go into it. How the mob as well turn on their own. So you've got people like Martina Navratilova and Sharon Davies that are talking about in sport how obviously if men, you know, transition over to being women and then they take part, then it's going to destroy female sport. And of course it is, because as we know, you know, it's not about being arrogant or arsey or anything. Men are physically stronger than women, and he gives the example of Venus Williams and how she would be ranked about 800 if she played in men's tennis, and apparently that's even possibly generous. And people always say when you see Venus, they often say, don't they? God, look at the size of her. She's really strong, isn't she, and stuff. And I heard what she bench pressed the other day. Someone said what she bench pressed, and it kind of put it into perspective for me, because I can bench press about 170 kilos. I've been able to do that for years. I'm not crazy with weight training. I've done it most of my life. I've never really kind of done it to any kind of extreme, but 170 is fairly heavy. And I think she was doing like 120 or something. And I remember thinking, God, 120 is really impressive. Or was it 110? Something like that. I remember thinking it was really impressive, but it just kind of made me realise, as big and powerful and as athletic as she looks, that still isn't a great deal compared to a man who's done a bit of training, basically. So yeah, there's a huge difference between men and women. There just is, biologically. It's, you know, but of course, yes, you know, we have to be open-minded, don't we? Of course we do. Everyone has their own, how they identify, their own feelings, you know, and there does need to be more open-mindedness about it all, because we can be quite conservative and judgmental and threatened potentially and what have you. But yeah, Boris Johnson as well, he talks about shaking hands in hospitals during the COVID stuff, and just kind of proudly talking about shaking hands with everyone, and just the I know we look back with hindsight, but I can remember at the time thinking it was ridiculous, talking to my sister who's a doctor, my brother who's a doctor, my brother-in-law who's a doctor, my dad who's a retired GP, and there he is just going around the hospitals happily shaking hands with everyone. You know, it's just like, you wouldn't do that even if it wasn't COVID-19, and you wouldn't even do that with normal flu. You know, it's obvious that it's transmitted by your hands and kind of shaking hands and touching people, but obviously he wants to be arrogant about it. So yeah, we've got Dominic Cummings and people. Just the disgrace that is Dominic Cummings going off to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight, put his kid in the car, wanted to test his eyesight. Yeah, okay. So why the hell should why would anyone... I would follow the rules regardless of what Dominic Cummings does, because I don't follow the rules because I've been told to. I follow the rules because it's common sense, and I think that actually I don't want to spread it to my parents and to other people, and I'd hate to think that I'd spread it to someone and they died, or I'd hate to think I got it myself. So I don't follow the rules for those reasons. I follow the rules for my own common sense and because I care, basically. But why should other people who don't think like that follow the rules if the people who make them are just going off and doing whatever they want? I mean, it's just obvious, isn't it? I mean, it's not complicated. So these people do deserve to be torn apart by Piers, as far as I'm concerned. I wish he had more opportunities to do it more often. I'm sure he does as well. He managed to get a test, didn't he? So he could get straight back to work and stuff. He just spoke to, what's his name, Chris Whitty, got a test, even though there's people working in hospitals and things, and doctors and GPs, nurses, so care workers who can't get tests and things, who couldn't at the time, but he can have one because he's Michael Gove. Yeah, he's been such a fantastic guy, hasn't he, in recent years, everything he's done for education and what have you. He mentions Barack Obama talking at a university, saying that you should argue with people you disagree with, because it's not good to be coddled. You know, you should be reading books that have things in that are considered to be maybe antiquated and a bit scary and what have you, because actually you need to be exposed to these things and think about these things and debate them and talk about them. We can't just be pretending they don't exist. So yeah, Tom Moore, basically, he's the guy that we need to try and aspire to be like, isn't he, basically? I mean, the man's in his 100, sorry, isn't he? He's just turned 100. And he raised how many million for the NHS, and he's done a book now as well. And yeah, be like Tom Moore. Don't be like the Sussexes, Meghan and Harry. Don't be like Cummings, for God's sake, please. Don't be like Kim Kardashian either, particularly. Let's be a bit more like Tom Moore. I completely agree with Piers. I almost don't like to do a review where I'm completely kind of agreeing, but I do feel quite strongly. There was that John McDaniel guy in America. I think he was in New York. I think he was an entrepreneur, a businessman or something, and he was basically saying, you know, leave us alone if we want to go out. You can't tell us to not go out. If you're scared of the virus, then stay in, look after yourself, but don't restrict the rest of us. And then he caught COVID and died. So pretty horrible. I'd hate to think people were sort of saying, I told you so, because I think that's a pretty... The guy didn't deserve to die at the end of the day. You wouldn't wish someone dying of COVID, would you, necessarily? You wouldn't wish it on them. But obviously the fact that he was kind of going on about it in quite such an arrogant way is a little bit ironic, isn't it? I saw on Instagram not long ago where they posted it, where this picture of a doctor, and apparently he or she had said something like people who don't refuse the vaccine, or, you know, disagree with the vaccine or COVID deniers or whatever, shouldn't be given any treatment. They should just be allowed to die. And these people ranting underneath saying, fucking arsehole, doctor, he's some kind of doctor and blah, blah, blah. He should be struck off. I know doctors personally who have said the same thing, and I completely agree with them. It doesn't mean they would actually do it. I know that I'm also pretty confident that doctors they would actually save life if it was in front of them. They had to do it, regardless of they might be pissed off that the person was an arsehole, and rightly so, actually, but they still would treat them. But I do understand the idea or the concept that actually if people want to be so flippant about it and not have a vaccine that's there for them to have, then maybe they should sign a waiver that says... Because what people don't seem to realise is, and I've seen people do this as well, where they've just sort of said, oh, I want to go and do this, I want to go and do that, I don't care if I catch it. Well, you might not care if you catch it, but the people who treat you care about you catching it, because they might then catch it off of you, and you might pass it to someone else. That's kind of the problem. It doesn't really take much imagination or intelligence to understand that concept, I don't think. Yeah, so basically the whole thing, he's just talking about entitlement, being woke, being lectured by people who are woke, and just how dangerous it is that we live in a world now where you just can't really say... You've got to be really careful what you say. And yes, I understand that we have to be kind, we have to be good and empathetic towards each other, but we do need to be able to toughen up a little bit. We do need to be able to kind of give our opinion, and it's okay to have an opinion that might not be part of the crowd necessarily. And we're also not actually all parts of groups, are we? We're all actually individuals, so we're all quite complicated, really, when you think about it. And most of us, if not every single one of us, will have a difference of opinion in one way or another. And I've never been one for particularly following the crowd, really. And I tend to think I have different things from here and there based on my experience, my upbringing, what have you. And I consider myself to be a liberal. I always have done. I'm very open-minded. There's very few things that shock me, really, at all. I've done lots of silly things myself when I was younger, so I'd be a massive hypocrite if I was too sort of conservative, really. But I do have some conservative views. I do care about some traditional values to a certain extent in some ways. Yeah, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that, really. And if anyone's got a problem with that, they can do me the honour of having a conversation with me about it rather than sort of getting all upset about it. So a slightly aggro review there from me today, but it is something that kind of... I actually really enjoyed the book. The book didn't make me feel aggro listening to it. I enjoyed it. It made me laugh. I thought it was good. But when I talk about this stuff, I do feel the need to kind of get a little bit heated with it, I think, because it is irritating. But more than it being irritating, it's actually really important. I want my kids to grow up in a world where they're able to express their opinions, and to feel strong enough that they're able to do that without sort of having people come down on like a ton of bricks. I think when you're not in the public eye, like myself, I'm just a very minor YouTuber, it's easy to have quite strong opinions. When you're someone like Piers, well, Piers has made his kind of career that way, I guess, but when you're someone who's on telly and you're kind of in the limelight, stuff that you say can have a real impact, and that's what's happening. People are getting cancelled for saying certain things. Ricky Gervais is another good one. Look him up on YouTube and check out some of his stuff. He's just absolutely hilarious. Some of the stuff he said at is it the Oscars or BAFTAs or I don't know, somewhere. It was Hollywood, I think. Some award ceremony in Hollywood. That's how much interest I have in those things, and he was just absolutely hammering them. It was just so funny. It's a bit like the sort of thing that Piers does to politicians on GMB, but he was doing it to all these Hollywood stars. just giving it to them both barrels. Really entertaining. But this is a good book. I enjoyed it. Wake Up by Piers Morgan. Cheers.